There are cases that push the limits of our understanding of death, cases that make us question whether some spirits truly want to leave this world. My name is Michael, and for 21 years, I've prepared bodies for their final farewell. But I had never faced someone who literally refused to be buried. If you believe death is a passive process, that the dead simply accept their fate, you might want to stop listening now, because what I'm about to tell you will show that some spirits fight death with a strength that defies all the laws of nature. This is the story of Eleanor Whitmore, a woman who spent 72 hours fighting her own burial, and how I learned that not all the dead are ready to rest in peace. Get ready to meet the most determined spirit I've ever encountered, and to understand that sometimes death is only the beginning of the real struggle. It was March 2023, one of the rainiest springs we'd ever seen. Eleanor Whitmore, 67, had died from cardiac complications at the city's General Hospital, a widow with no children and only a distant niece as her closest living relative. It should have been a simple, straightforward case. No complications. Her niece, Rebecca Morrison, came to the funeral home with very specific instructions. Aunt Eleanor was always an independent woman, she told me. She made sure everything was planned. Simple burial, oak casket, hillside cemetery. She even picked her burial plot 5 years ago. Eleanor had indeed planned everything. A detailed will, precise funeral instructions, even the dress she wanted to be buried in. A classy navy blue outfit that had been her favorite. The kind of organization that makes our job easier and brings comfort to families. When I received Eleanor's body, the first thing I noticed was her expression. Even in death, she looked determined. Not serene or lifeless, as is usually the case, but like someone who had made a final, firm decision. Like she had unfinished business she refused to let go of. The initial prep was routine. Eleanor was well preserved, with no signs of trauma or visible illness, but something in the room felt off, a tension in the air, like something important was about to happen. It was during the embalming process that the first signs appeared. The lights began to flicker for no reason. The temperature shifted from icy cold to suffocating heat. And then, for the first time in 21 years on the job, a body moved, right on my prep table. Eleanor opened her eyes. Not a post-mortem reflex, not an involuntary twitch. She actually opened her eyes and looked straight at me. "No," she said, her voice like a breath of pure resolve. "Not yet. I'm not ready." I gasped instinctively, but Eleanor sat up on the table, completely, as if she'd just woken up from a nap. "I need more time," she continued. "There's something I must do before I go. Something I can't leave unfinished." 3 days, Eleanor said, locking eyes with mine. "Give me 3 days to settle what I need to settle. After that, I promise I'll go in peace." And before I could say a word, she lay back down, closed her eyes, and returned to what looked like death. That night, I realized Eleanor Whitmore wasn't simply dead. She was caught somewhere in between, fighting death itself to complete a mission she believed more important than resting in peace. And I had 72 hours to find out what it was. The next morning, I tried to stick to my usual routine. The funeral was scheduled for Friday, 2 days away. But Eleanor had other plans. Every time I entered the room where she was, I found signs that she had moved during the night. Instruments I had carefully arranged were now set differently. Flowers placed around the casket had been rearranged into specific patterns, and always, there was a feeling that someone had been working in the room while I was gone. On the second night, I decided to stay at the funeral home and observe things directly. At exactly 11:47 p.m., Eleanor rose from the table as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She looked at me kindly and said, "Thank you for giving me this time, Michael. I know it's hard to understand." Eleanor began searching the room, opening drawers, examining instruments, looking through corners and cabinets. "Where do you keep personal belongings?" she asked. "I need to find my wedding ring. Rebecca must have forgotten to bring it, but it's essential for what I have to do." I showed her where we stored the personal effects of the deceased. Eleanor quickly found her ring, a simple gold band she had worn through 43 years of marriage. She slipped it onto her finger and immediately seemed more solid, more present. My husband Henry died 10 years ago, Eleanor explained, while scribbling something on a piece of paper she'd found. But before he died, he made me promise something. Something I never fulfilled because I was afraid. But now that I'm dead, I'm not afraid of anything. Eleanor told me Henry had discovered that his business partner, a man named Richard Blackwood, had been embezzling client funds for years. Henry had gathered evidence but died of a heart attack before he could deliver it to the authorities. Henry made me promise I'd take the evidence to the police, Eleanor continued, but I was just a 57-year-old housewife, too scared to confront a powerful man like Richard. I locked everything in a safety deposit box at the bank, waiting for a courage that never came. And now Richard is about to retire as a respected man of the community, Eleanor said, impossible tears trailing down her lifeless face. He stole hundreds of thousands from hard-working people, destroyed families, and he's going to get away with it. I can't let that happen. Eleanor laid out her plan. She needed my help to retrieve the documents from the bank vault. Since she was technically dead, she couldn't access them herself. But if I went with a power of attorney she had prepared years ago. 2 days, she said. If we can get this evidence to the police in 2 days, Richard can still be prosecuted before retirement. After that, it's too late, and I can't go knowing I left this injustice unresolved. That night I realized Eleanor wasn't just fighting death. She was fighting time, injustice, and her own past cowardice. And somehow death had given her the courage she never had in life. The next morning, Thursday, the day before the scheduled funeral, I made a decision that defied every protocol of my profession. I decided to help Eleanor retrieve the documents. If she was truly fighting death to right a wrong, I couldn't just stand by. The City Central Bank was bustling when I arrived with the power of attorney Eleanor had prepared. The manager, Mr. Patterson, had known Eleanor for decades. "What a tragedy," he said. "Eleanor was one of our most cherished clients. Of course, I can grant you access to the vault as her representative." Inside the vault, I found exactly what Eleanor had described. A thick folder of documents, photographs, bank statements, all meticulously organized by Henry Whitmore. Irrefutable evidence that Richard Blackwood had embezzled over $400,000 across 18 years. There were even audio recordings. Henry had secretly taped conversations where Richard openly discussed the embezzlement and how he covered it up in the books. It was enough not just for dismissal, but for serious criminal prosecution. I called the city's police department and scheduled a meeting with the detective in charge of financial crimes. I told them I had urgent evidence of corporate fraud. The meeting was set for 3 p.m. When I returned to the funeral home, Eleanor was waiting for me, but this time she looked different, more transparent, as if she were beginning to fade. "Did you get it?" she asked anxiously. When I showed her the documents, her face lit up with a joy that transcended death. "Henry would be so proud," Eleanor said, gently touching the papers. "He always believed I'd find the courage when I truly needed it, even if it took 10 years and, well, my own death to make it happen." At 3 p.m., I met with Detective Rodriguez at the precinct. When I laid out the evidence, his eyes widened. "My God," he said. "If this is real, we're looking at the biggest corporate fraud case in the city's history. Richard Blackwood's going to lose everything and likely spend decades behind bars." The detective immediately launched legal action. Search warrants were issued, bank accounts frozen, and Richard Blackwood was taken in for questioning. In just a few hours, the man who thought he'd escape justice was facing the full weight of it, thanks to the fight that Henry and Eleanor never gave up on. When I returned to the funeral home that night, Eleanor looked at peace for the first time since she'd died. "It's done," she said with a serene smile. "The promise has been fulfilled. Henry can rest and I can finally go." "Tomorrow will be my funeral," Eleanor continued, "and this time I'll truly be ready to go. Thank you for helping me find the courage I needed. Thank you for believing that some things are more important than death itself." Friday morning arrived with clear skies for the first time in weeks. Eleanor's funeral was scheduled for 10 a.m., and this time I knew she was truly leaving. Overnight, she had become increasingly transparent, as if preparing for the final transition. Rebecca arrived early, accompanied by a few friends from the community. "I can't explain it," she told me, "but I feel like Aunt Eleanor is finally at peace. I had a dream about her last night, and she looked radiant, like she had completed something incredibly important." During the ceremony, something extraordinary happened. As the pastor spoke about Eleanor's life, her devotion to her husband and her community, a soft breeze began to blow through the sealed chapel. It was impossible, yet everyone felt it. The flowers around the casket began to sway gently, as if touched by an invisible hand. And then, for the first and only time during the entire ordeal, Eleanor made her presence known to everyone there. "Thank you." Her voice echoed softly through the chapel, not frightening or unsettling, but warm, full of gratitude. "Thank you for allowing me to finish what needed to be done. Now I can go in peace to be with Henry." Her voice faded like a summer breeze. Everyone in the chapel heard it. It wasn't mass hysteria or suggestion. It was truly Eleanor, saying goodbye to those she left behind. Rebecca, through tears, said, "That was always her, determined to the end, but always kind and thankful." The procession to Hillside Cemetery was peaceful. For the first time in 3 days, I felt no resistance, no supernatural tension. Eleanor was finally ready to rest, her mission fulfilled, her promise kept. When the casket was lowered into the ground, there were no strange occurrences, no ghostly signs. The earth fell softly over the polished oak, and I felt a deep peace settle over the cemetery. Eleanor Whitmore had finally found rest. But before she departed completely, I felt one last presence beside me. Eleanor was there, translucent as morning light, smiling with a serenity beyond words. A week later, the local newspapers ran the headline, "Retired accountant arrested for million-dollar fraud." Richard Blackwood was sentenced to 15 years in prison and ordered to repay every cent uncovered. The families he had harmed finally received justice after years of silent suffering. A month later, I received a letter from Rebecca. She thanked me for making her aunt's funeral so special and apparent. She never learned the full truth about how the evidence against Richard was uncovered, but she told me she had found a handwritten note from Eleanor at home. The note read simply, "Some promises are too sacred to be broken by death. Henry, I'm coming, forgive the delay." It was unmistakably Eleanor's handwriting, but dated the day after her funeral. Impossible, yet real. That case completely changed my understanding of death and the spirits who linger. I learned that not all the dead are ready to leave right away. Some have unfinished business so important they fight death itself to set things right. Eleanor Whitmore taught me that death isn't always a passive surrender. Sometimes it's a final chance to fix what we couldn't in life. Sometimes the courage we lacked while alive shows up only when we have nothing left to lose. Since then, whenever I encounter a case where the spirit seems reluctant to move on, I ask myself, what does this person need to resolve? What promise must they fulfill? What injustice needs correcting? Because I've learned, some spirits know exactly what they're doing. The 72 hours Eleanor asked for weren't out of stubbornness or whim. They were the exact time needed to fix a 10-year injustice and fulfill a sacred promise to the husband she loved. It was the time she needed to find the courage she'd been searching for over a decade. If you've made it this far, if you're still with me after this confession, leave the word courage in the comments. Because sometimes the dead teach us lessons about bravery that the living still need to learn. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find the strength that was always inside you. Remember, not all resistance to death is stubbornness. Sometimes it's determination. Sometimes it's love. And sometimes it's simply the need to leave the world a little better than we found it. Eleanor taught me that some spirits are braver in death than they ever were in life, and that 72 hours can be enough to change the world if you know exactly what needs to be done. Until the next confession, and may we all find the courage Eleanor had before it's too late.